This video is going to go out to Sammi, Leigh, and Flower Child. Alright, what does Sammi Leigh write? You keep talking about how you have the credentials and how you have more experience and how you graduated college and so on and so on. You don't make a very good case about Jeff Bliss if you keep talking about yourself constantly, regardless if you're just using yourself as a comparison. He doesn't have the credentials to know how the school system works, but he is a student, and I believe students have the credentials to know how they learn best. And then she goes on to write, and what credentials is he supposed to have okay, let me try this again. And what credentials is he supposed to have exactly to be able to criticize the school system? If you are a student in the school system and you have attended the school system for some time, don't you think a student would have some knowledge about the school system? About how they are taught the best? How does your data processing credentials give you the right to criticize a teacher? And then Flower Child writes, I'm not at all inclined to understand her position. If someone tells you that you're wrong, you should investigate it. Don't just assume you're right just because you feel you know more. If someone shows you evidence that you're wrong, you can't just ignore it. This is especially important if you're a teacher. If you aren't open enough to admit your mistakes, you will pass them on to all of your future students. Okay, how do I respond? Well, a little clarification is needed. First of all, when I went to high school, I also went to a technical institute. Now back then they were called vocational centers. Okay? And it was there that I learned the art of programming in the computer language of COBOL, Common Business Oriented Language. Okay? Now then, these kind of facilities were set up for people that didn't have a whole lot of income, which included myself. Basically your poor man's college. Alright. Now I spent 2 years there studying how to program in COBOL. I was second from the top in my class. I received a certificate from that place from a bunch of teachers who finally recognized what I was able to do. Now I also had experience in high school programming in what is called GW Basic. Okay, now Basic is the Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code. Now, in order to program in both of these languages, you have to have the following things. Good grammar skills. Why? Because you have to read in-depth textbooks. And if you're programming in COBOL, you have to format it in a proper English format. Don't believe me, you can research it for yourself. You also have to have good analytical skills. That means good mathematical skills. You also have to have an in-depth knowledge of computers. Furthermore, you have to have accounting skills. Why do you have to have accounting skills? Because much of the data presented to you is accounting data. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take all this accounting data, which is jumbled everywhere, and turn it into something that ordinary people can actually read and understand. That's 4 things you have to have in order to successfully program in COBOL. Alright. In high school, I also graduated with a full-scale diploma. I averaged a 3.275 GPA. Now that was back in the day when the highest GPA was 4.0. I know in some schools now it's 5.0, but back then it was 4.0. I was rather astonished by what I had learned. Okay? Now then, what were my 2 hardest subjects? Geometry was one, and that's because I didn't have Euclid's elements. The teacher didn't tell me about that. 2, I had a tough time backing my car out of the driveway. That was the only 2 things I had problems with. Everything else I did fine. Now then. Whew. So there are my credentials. Okay? Now you say, well, you're not making a very good case for Jeff Bliss if you're using myself as an example. Yes, I am, because what I am saying to you is that Jeff Bliss did not have the credentials necessary to debate that teacher. Why? Because he was a high school dropout. That means he does not have a certificate that says he's smart. That means he can't have people saying to her, see, when you get that diploma, when you get that high school diploma, that means a bunch of teachers have said, hey, you know what, this kid's smart. Now those teachers may be dumb as a box of rocks because they may have just passed you out of school without thoroughly examining how smart you really were, but the way it's supposed to work is these academias finally say, hey, you know what, this kid is smart enough, we're going to give him a diploma that says now that he's smart. That's the way it's supposed to work. In my case, that's exactly how it worked. Okay? In order to debate this further, he should have had at least some college education. And yes, I actually attended a community college. And I would have finished my work, except I ran out of money. That had nothing to do with my grades because I maintained my 3.275 GPA all the way in college. Oops. So it was a monetary problem that kept me from a major PhD. That's all it was. All right. So that's why I'm better at this than he is. All right. So, then you go on to say, and what credentials is he supposed to have exactly to be able to criticize the school system? Like I said, a high school diploma and at least some college. That way you can say, these people say I'm not stupid. You can't just dismiss me as a stupid person because these people say I'm not stupid. Now you're arguing with them. You're not just arguing with me anymore, you're arguing with them. There you go. And you have attended the school system for some time. Don't you think a student would have some knowledge about the school system? Not necessarily. And besides that, having knowledge about a school system is not a employable credential. You can't use that as a means of getting gainful employment. So I know a little bit about the school system. So what? A lot of people do. You have a master's in teaching, that gets you a job. Okay? And how they are taught the best. Okay, I'm going to have to cover that in a future video. I will cover that. How does your data processing credentials give you the right to criticize a teacher? Well, it establishes that I'm just as smart as they are. And number two, I have an ability to take large amounts of data and turn it into something that even the ordinary man can understand. I have taught adult ed for 4 years on YouTube. That's how it gives me the credentials to challenge them. See what I mean? All right. So, now the thing is, why are credentials so important? Well, I want you to research the topic of debate classes. As soon as you research the topic of debate classes, you will begin to realize how important credentials actually are. Then you'll begin to understand what I was trying to say. Hopefully that answered your question. Now then, we go to Flowerchild. He says, I am not at all inclined to understand her position. Okay, I'm going to make 2 videos. The first will be about how bad the modern day textbooks actually are. The second will be about those packets that Jeff Bliss was just chomping the bit on. And I will give a better dissertation on teaching packets than he did. And I'll show you the difference between what I can say and what he can say. Since Jeff Bliss did not have the credentials necessary to challenge that teacher, he could have brought in documentation from people who did have those kind of credentials and argued a far more successful case. And he probably would have won. He probably would have been given an A for the class instead of a detention and possible expulsion. Now there. As for your teacher, the one that said the squares were a type of trapezoid, how do you argue that? With a modern day textbook? I'm going to make a video that will show you why modern day textbooks should never be used as an argument. You wait for that. You're going to be surprised. How do you argue that? Euclid's Elements. Euclid's Elements. I'll now show you how you should argue such cases. Alright. Let's see your teacher challenge this. Rectilineal figures are those which are contained by straight lines. Trilateral figures being those contained by 3, quadrilateral those contained by 4, and multilateral those contained by more than 4 straight lines. Of quadrilateral figures, a square is that which is both equilateral and right-angled. And let quadrilaterals other than these be called trapezia, which is trapezoid. Let a teacher argue that Euclid, this Euclid stuff here, has been used in classrooms for the last 1,000 years. For her to argue this would destroy her credentials automatically. Unless she could come up with an argument superior to that, she would lose all credibility. That's the difference. Are you getting my point now? Okay. If someone shows you evidence that you're wrong, if they show you proper evidence that you're wrong, you can't just ignore it. And I agree with that. This is especially important if you're a teacher. I agree. If you aren't open enough to admit your mistakes when you are shown credible evidence that you're wrong, you will pass them on to all your future students, which I agree. So, to conclude this particular video, I will make a video, okay, about the teaching packets. I will also make a video about how bad some of our modern textbooks really are, and show you why you can't really use those as an argument against teachers, and why you have to go to source documents like Euclid in order to argue your case successfully. I encourage both of you to research debate classes and find out why credentials are so important. Alright. That's all I've got to say for this video. I will tell you more in a future video, so stay tuned.